जो टॉपिक पढ़ेंगे हम हमारे चैप्टर के अंदर वो प्लानिंग के ऊपर है। अब तक हमने डेवलपमेंट के बारे में बात की, डेवलपमेंट के आइडियाज के बारे में बात की, डेवलपमेंटल गोल्स के बारे में बात किया एंड नाउ वी आर मूविंग ऑन टू प्लानिंग। अब प्लानिंग क्या है, ये क्यों इम्पोर्टेंट है और डेवलपमेंट का इससे क्या रिलेशनशिप है, या व्हाई वी नीड द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ प्लानिंग टू कैरी फॉरवर्ड डेवलपमेंट, वो हम देखेंगे हमारे अगले चैप्टर में। So let's begin with this topic. The first thing about planning is, because our country had recently gained independence, and because we were a country that was striving to achieve development by any means. We were, because we had a lot of developmental problems. हमारे पास poverty eradication का, और हमारे पास इंडस्ट्री ग्रो करने का, एग्रीकल्चर को रिफॉर्म करने का, हमारे पास तरह तरह के प्रॉब्लम्स थे हमारे इंडिपेंडेंट इंडिया में, बिकॉज वी हैड रिसेंटली गेन इंडिपेंडेंस एंड वी वर अ कंट्री with our own administrative rights for the first time in like 200 years. So we had to set things right, and in order to set things right, in order to make sure that things go right, and in order to move about the developmental path in a proper structured manner, that is why we needed the concept of planning. Planning exactly इस सेंस में है हमारे when it comes to the developmental aspect of planning, what it actually means is, so a group of people would sit together और वो लोग बैठ के डिसाइड करेंगे कि, एंड सिंस हमारी कंट्री में 5 ईयर प्लान जो है वो फॉलो होते हैं, जो कि हम पढ़ेंगे आगे जाके, तो what actually happened is a group of people would sit together and there'd be a committee, there'd be a organization, and they would plan out कि हमारे अगले 5 साल के, because we have a 5 year plan, that's why in our case अगले 5 साल के जो इनकम होंगे, जो एक्सपेंडिचर होंगे, वो एग्जैक्टली पैसा कहाँ से आएगा, पैसा किन किन चीजों में लगाया जाएगा, और क्या क्या एक्टिविटीज कैरी आउट करेंगे, क्या क्या नए प्रोजेक्ट्स हम लोग अंडरटेक करेंगे, किस किस चीज को हमें सुधारनी है, किन चीजों पे हमें पैसा लगाना है. These are the things which come under planning, and planning was important because we had to reform certain things in our economy, in our country. हमें बहुत जगहों पे बहुत सारी डेवलपमेंटल एक्टिविटीज जो है वो कैरी आउट करनी थी, तो इसीलिए प्लानिंग हमारे केस में बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट था. सो वील लुक एट इट पॉइंट वाइज लाइक इट्स गिवन इन आवर बुक. The first thing is planning was needed, or there was a need for a design for development. मतलब डेवलपमेंट अगर हम करना चाहते हैं, डेवलपमेंट अगर हम सच में लाना चाहते हैं, तो उसके लिए हमें एक प्लान बनाना पड़ेगा, उसके लिए हमें एक डिजाइन बनाना पड़ेगा कि हम एग्जैक्टली कैसे उस चीज को इम्प्लीमेंट करना चाहते हैं. हमारे पास एक डेवलपमेंटल गोल तो है, बट उसका जो एग्जीक्यूशन है, जो इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है, वो हम कैसे रियलिटी में वो हम कैसे करेंगे. तो वो डिजाइन हमें बनाना था, वो प्लान हमें तैयार करना था, ताकि वो हम ताकि वो एक रियलिस्टिक प्लान बने और उसको हम मतलब इम्प्लीमेंट कर सके. वो मतलब ऐसा नहीं रह जाए कि वो सिर्फ थ्योरेटिकल हमने कोई प्लान बना दिया और उस पर काम चल रहा है, नहीं चल रहा है, ऐसा नहीं होना था. हमें एक बहुत ही रियलिस्टिक डिजाइन बनाना था, एक प्लान फॉर्मुलेट करना था, उस प्लान के बेसिस पे काम होना चाहिए, ताकि so that things actually happen in a proper way. So that is why we needed a design for development, or we needed a plan, a structured plan or formula for carrying out development in our country. And then it was important for rebuilding the economy, like we discussed, because India had gained independence very recently. तो हमारे पास बहुत सारी challenges थी. हमें एग्रीकल्चर को डेवलप करना था, हमें we had to improve the industrialization situation in our country. We had to build human capital formations. We had numerous challenges in our economy. We had to eradicate poverty. We had to support every section of the society. तो उस पूरे, क्योंकि जितना हमें एक्सप्लॉइट किया गया था ब्रिटिश कॉलोनियल रूल के टाइम पे, वो सारी चीजें हमें एकदम ग्राउंड लेवल से ठीक करना पड़ता. वी हैड टू सेट एवरीथिंग राइट फ्रॉम द वेरी बेस ऑफ इट. तो इसीलिए जो ये इकोनॉमी को रीबिल्डिंग का कॉन्सेप्ट है, जो हमें हर चीज में सोच समझ के अपना पैसा लगाना पड़ेगा, हर चीज में, कि कैसे उस चीज को इम्प्रूव किया जाए, कैसे उसको बेटर बनाया जाए. तो उसके लिए we had to make plans for being able to develop those things, because we needed a formula for those things. We needed a, we needed to make a design for those things so that we were able to go by that formula and set things right. So planning was very important when it comes to, rebuilding the economy. और प्लानिंग का जो ये मुद्दा था, इससे बहुत, इट गेन्ड पॉपुलर सपोर्ट, इसे बहुत ज्यादा सपोर्ट मिला हर तरफ से। चाहे हम पॉलिटिक्स में भी, एक जो हमने पढ़ा था लास्ट टाइम, जो लेफ्टिस्ट और राइटिस्ट पार्टीज होती है, तो हर तरफ से फ्रॉम द लेफ्टिस्ट पार्टीज एंड फ्रॉम द राइटिस्ट पार्टीज, वो द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ प्लानिंग एक्चुअली गॉट अ लॉट ऑफ पॉपुलर सपोर्ट फ्रॉम एवरी साइड, राइट? So let's discuss why it got popular support, because there were, इस चीज को कोई मतलब इस चीज को कोई ऑब्जेक्ट नहीं कर रहा था. Nobody said that no, planning is a very bad idea and we shouldn't go forward with it. Nobody said that, because people were actually very, in favor of the idea of planning. So why the planning was, it actually gained a lot of popular support. These are the reasons that we've listed. These are the reasons that are given in our book, just as examples. So the first reason was the Great Depression in Europe. Then there was the interwar construction of Japan and Germany, and then there's economic growth in Soviet Union. In just one line, if we discuss all of these things, actually हुआ ये था कि in countries में, these countries actually had a, very very bad, very disturbed political economic situation, right? तो यूरोप में ग्रेट डिप्रेशन चल रहा था, ठीक है? जापान और जर्मनी वॉर के इफेक्ट से रिकवर कर रहे थे, और इवन सोवियत यूनियन वाज, इट वाज इन्वॉल्वड इन द वॉर एज वेल, एंड देन लेटर ऑन इन द कोल्ड वॉर. सो बेसिकली कहना ये चाहते हैं कि इन सब का एक बहुत ही डिस्टर्ब्ड पॉलिटिको इकोनॉमिक पास्ट रहा है. And all these, in all these countries, planning actually helped these countries to recover their situation. They actually, were able to set things right. And even USSR में जो ये प्लानिंग का, जो हमारा पूरा प्लानिंग का और प्लानिंग कमीशन का भी कॉन्सेप्ट है, ये बेसिकली USSR से या सोवियत यूनियन से डिराइव किया गया था. तो since this country followed the planning the way we do now, तो यहाँ पे बहुत ज्यादा इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ हुआ था. The planning was actually a huge success in the Soviet Union, and in 1930s and 1940s. So later on it disintegrated, but at least when it was working, at least when things started, it was a huge success. So इसी चीज से impress होके our Indian leaders, our Indian national leaders, they actually thought that it's not a very bad idea to, because it worked in so many countries, and countries with such disturbed past, with such disturbed histories, countries which were facing which were just recovering from wars, or which was recovering from depression. Because depression क्या होता है? It's like when you hit the bottommost part of a recession situation, that's when depression happens. And that is why, because this planning was used in these countries, and these countries actually were able to make proper use of the planning concept, and they were able to recover from their situation and take its benefits. तो इसीलिए हमारी कंट्री में भी प्लानिंग के कॉन्सेप्ट को बहुत सपोर्ट किया गया था. और ये डिसाइड हुआ था कि ये जो डेवलपमेंट चीज है, ये जो डेवलपमेंट हम अपने देश में लाना चाहते हैं, ये जो लोगों की हम इतनी मदद करना चाहते हैं, ये जो एग्रीकल्चर को हम रिवाइव करना चाहते हैं, ये जो इंडस्ट्री को हम डेवलप करना चाहते हैं, इन सब चीजों के लिए हमें प्लानिंग बहुत जरूरी है. इन सब के लिए हमें वी हैव टू गो फॉरवर्ड विद द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ प्लानिंग. ऑल्सो एक और चीज है जहां पे प्लानिंग की बात आती है, व्हाट इट एक्चुअली मीन्स इज, सो प्लानिंग करेगा कौन? पीपल फ्रॉम द गवर्नमेंट, पीपल फ्रॉम द एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, दोज हु आर देयर एट टॉप नॉच लेवल्स इन द गवर्नमेंट. सो प्लानिंग एक्चुअली वुड बी डन बाय दीज पीपल, एंड दैट मीन्स व्हाट? इट मीन्स कि गवर्नमेंट के हाथ में और ज्यादा पावर आ गया, सिंस गवर्नमेंट इज डिसाइडिंग द course of the economy for the future years, for the years to come, for the recent future. So it actually gets, because your giving the government or giving people from the administration that power to, plan out the course of the economy. So it actually gives more power to their hands, and that is basically, it's basically giving more power to the government. And that happens in what? That happens in a socialistic form of, society, because when there is socialism, it always means that the government has more and more powers. The government has, the entire power in the economy. So हमारे country में already पहले से एक socialistic tilt था. People from, because like we discussed earlier, people from the Congress or even from other parties actually were more inclined towards this kind of socialistic form of economy that they had in USSR. So even if we introduce the, concept of planning, and even if we set people for, being involved in these planning commissions, so that meant more power in the hands of, the government, right? So इससे जो private industry है हमारा, या जो investors है, these people should have been alienated by the fact that you're giving more power to the government. But it didn't happen. What actually happened is, जो private investors है, like big industrialists or let's say big business entrepreneurs, like जो people who are actually involved in the private sector, people who are, spending their own money and their own entrepreneurship in the private sector, these people were also not against planning. They were also in favor of the planning process. And what actually happened is, in the year 1944, they, sat together and they brought out a draft or a resolution which they called the Bombay Plan, in which they favored the idea that, there should be a planning, and ये planning का जो concept है, ये चीज set up किया जाना चाहिए, and there should be people who carry forth these, planning, which later came to be known as the Planning Commission. So these people actually, gave their resolution in favor of the concept of planning, and this in investors का ये जो draft था, या ये जो resolution था, उसको हम कहते हैं Bombay Plan. This draft prepared by big investors, in which they favored the planning process. So that is what came to be known as the Bombay Plan, which was, made in 1944. So anyway, that just goes on to say कि even मतलब जो parties थी हमारी, जो left और right parties थी, जो political parties थी, वो भी planning को support कर रही थी. जो people who were in the government, so the leaders, the national leaders, they were also supporting the individual leaders. They were also supporting the idea of planning, and even private investors, even people were very excited. Even common people were very excited about this planning thing and this planning commission, setting up the planning commission. तो ये जो planning का concept था, इसको exactly implement कैसे करें? So we decided that we'll set up a commission of a group of people who will this group will be known as the planning commission, जो plans बनाएगा. और ये plans कैसे बनाएगा? तो हमारे पास गवर्नमेंट के पास एक पैसा आने का एक जरिया होता है, पैसा लगाने के लिए उसके पास तरह तरह की जगह होती है, राइट? तो एक जो पैसा आ रहा है, by means of tax collection or whatever, so that revenue which is coming, so the government will use that revenue and put it in, a lot of expenditure projects. It has to put it in healthcare and social welfare and infrastructure development, or even let's say जो government employees के जो salaries देने होते हैं इनको. So the government has a lot of places in which it has to, in which it has to pay people, in which it has to spend money. तो government के पास expenditure बहुत wide expenditure होता है. So this planning commission's work was basically to formulate this plan that so the government is getting money, which is its income, and the government is making certain expenditures. So we have to make a plan about where the money should come from and where it should go to. अब ये जो plans है, ये basically 1-2 साल के लिए नहीं है, ये 5-year plans है, which we've abbreviated as FYPs. So ये 5-year plans बनते हैं, in which we list out the income and expenditure, where the money is coming from and where it's going to. और ये ये जो बजट बनता है, ये जो 5 ईयर प्लान में बजट का सिस्टम है, ये बेसिकली दो टाइप के होते हैं. एक होता है नॉन प्लान बजट एंड द अदर वन इज अ प्लान बजट. सो नॉन प्लान बजट बेसिकली ये होता है वेयर द गवर्नमेंट हैज टू पे सर्टेन रूटीन एक्सपेंडिचर्स, वेयर मतलब ये पैसा गवर्नमेंट को लगाना ही लगाना है, बिकॉज दीज आर द एक्सपेंसेस ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट दैट इट हैज टू इनकर. इट डजंट हैव एनी अदर ऑप्शन. इट्स लाइक like paying salaries to government employees. It's like वो चीज प्लान करने की जरूरत नहीं होती है, राइट? वो चीज गवर्नमेंट को देनी ही पड़ती है. सो दैट कम्स अंडर नॉन प्लान बजट, विच थिंग्स विच डोंट नीड टू बी प्लान्ड. And then there's the plan budget where we talk about things which need to be planned from before, and which is like which is a non-routine expenditure of the government. The government doesn't have to always pay for these expenditures, but it's like it's once in a while sort of expenditure. Like suppose for an example, let's say कि गवर्नमेंट को इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पे स्पेंड करना है, राइट? तो गवर्नमेंट को नए रोड्स बनाने हैं, ब्रिजेस बनाने हैं, या इवन स्कूल्स बनाने हैं. सो इट हैज टू डेवलप इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर. सो दैट इज नॉट अ routine expenditure. That is not something that the government does every day. That is something that's a new project that the government is taking up. वो कोई नई चीज है, वो कोई काम ले रहा है अपने सर पे, वो काम हो जाएगा तो उसके बाद गवर्नमेंट को उस चीज में पैसा नहीं लगाना पड़ेगा. इट्स नॉट लाइक द गवर्नमेंट इज डूइंग इट टुडे एंड द गवर्नमेंट विल कीप ऑन डूइंग इट टुमारो, एंड द डे आफ्टर द गवर्नमेंट विल नॉट गो ऑन spending money in that thing. So listing out the differences, the non-planned budget actually means it lists out the routine expenditure of the government, and the planned budget is basically the non-routine expenditure. So this is something that the government has to do. The government has to put its money in, and this is something that the government doesn't always have to put its money in, but it's like a new project that the government is taking up maybe in this 5-year plan, and it won't be there in the next 5-year plan, right? तो आज इस 5 year के ड्यूरेशन में गवर्नमेंट एक प्रोजेक्ट उठाया and it will complete it in the next 5 years to come. तो अगला जब FIP बनेगा, the next FIP in that plan there will be no mention of the whatever things were there in this year's plan budget. So that is how it works. So that is how the 5-year plans were divided into certain things that the government will have to put its money in, and certain things that are that are fixed on a priority basis with the government, that कि गवर्नमेंट को ये चीज पहले सही करनी है, उसके बाद गवर्नमेंट ये प्रोजेक्ट पिकअप करेगा. So on a priority basis. So let's say on a priority basis. This is the terminology that's listed in the NCERT. So this is the routine expenditure of the government. This is the non-routine expenditure of things that the government picks up on a priority basis in its 5-year plans. अब बात करते हैं प्लानिंग कमीशन की. हमने डिस्कस किया था कि ये जो प्लान बनाने का काम है, इट्स बेसिकली डन बाय द प्लानिंग कमीशन. there's a group of people that sit together and make these plans, these budgets for the next 5 years. So एक चीज है प्लानिंग कमीशन की, it's headed by, or the leader, it's headed by the chairperson, which happens to be the prime minister. तो ये जो प्लानिंग कमीशन है, इसका the person in supreme position in the commission happens to be the chairperson, which is the prime minister. So the prime minister, जो भी देश का प्रधानमंत्री बनता है, वो प्लानिंग कमीशन का, वो अपने आप प्लानिंग कमीशन का चेयरपर्सन भी बन गया, और वो उनका है सुप्रीम पोजीशन इस प्लानिंग कमीशन में, because it actually makes sense, because he's the prime minister, so he should have the supreme authority in deciding the plan and the budget and whatever. So it's headed by the chairperson, who's also the prime minister. So now let's talk about the planning commission and how it came to existence. The first thing is, it was set up in March 1950 by a simple resolution of the government. So government of India ने एक मतलब, this is not something that was in the constitution. This is not something that actually had a mention in the constitution कि हाँ ऐसे plans बनाएंगे और ऐसे planning commission set up करना पड़ेगा, और वो planning commission जो भी बजट बनाएगा हमें उसको फॉलो करना पड़ेगा. It was actually done by the government of India. बहुत ही सिंपल सा एक रेजोल्यूशन पास करके ये प्लानिंग कमीशन सेटअप किया गया था, बिकॉज this was a very spontaneous idea which was quickly implemented. So it was set up in March 1950 by a simple resolution of the government. और प्लानिंग कमीशन का जो रोल है, it's actually an advisory role. By advisory role what it means is कि वो एडवाइस दे सकता है. इट कैन इट कैन नॉट से कि तुम ऐसा करो, तुम्हें ऐसा ही करना पड़ेगा, मैं बोल रहा हूँ तो तुम्हें ऐसा करना पड़ेगा, नहीं. इट सेज कि तुम्हें ऐसा करना चाहिए, इससे ये अच्छा होगा, दिस इज हाउ इट विल बेनिफिट यू. सो इट हैज अ एडवाइजरी रोल. इट हैज द राइट और द पावर टू गिव एडवाइसेस regarding plans and budgets, but its recommendations become effective only when it is approved by the union cabinet. तो एक बार यूनियन कैबिनेट ने इसके recommendations को अप्रूव कर दिया तो वो चीज इफेक्टिव बन गया, तो वो इम्प्लीमेंटेबल बन गया, तो उस चीज को फिर तुम्हें इम्प्लीमेंट करना पड़ेगा. सो बेसिकली द यूनियन कैबिनेट हैज द पावर और द अथॉरिटी to ratify its recommendations, to give to acknowledge its recommendations and make them make them implementable. So that is what it's setting up, and its power actually constitutes. And let's see the scope of work of the planning commission. Basically इसका role क्या है, ये क्या काम करता है. First of all, it's empowered with the task of providing adequate means of livelihood. So men and women in an economy, or in India, let's say in our country, men and women should have equal and adequate means of livelihood. That is what the planning commission is tasked to ensure. इसका काम ये है कि वो ये देखे कि आदमियों को और औरतों को या किसी भी तरह के सिटीजन को हमारे देश में, अगर वो हमारे देश का सिटीजन है तो उसको एक adequate means of livelihood मिलना चाहिए. It should have a proper source of income, which earns him enough money that he is able to live with it, right? So that is what its first task is. The second is distribution of natural resources to serve the common good. तो natural resources जो है, whatever form of resource that we find from the nature, that we don't have to develop ourselves, like technology, that we just obtain from the nature. So that is something that people have rights on. That is not something that somebody can own or control, besides land, let's say, because land has its own ownership. But even in that natural resource, the planning commission actually has to ensure, which इसके ऊपर land के ऊपर बहुत ज़्यादा पढ़ाई करेंगे हम इसके बाद, because that even then as a natural resource, it's a very constricted natural resource, because it's so valuable and it's in such less quantity, so you cannot provide unlimited plots of land to everybody in the economy. So but the task of the planning commission is to ensure the fact that natural resources are available to common people in a way that it serves the common good. Nobody just hogs away all the natural resources. It should reach to the hands of the common people. So that is what the second thing means. The third scope of its work is distribution of wealth to the common detriment. So the third task of the planning commission basically means कि जो भी wealth generate हो रही है economy में, जो भी income पैदा हो रहा है, जो भी पैसा आ रहा है, so that shouldn't be concentrated in the hands of a few people. That should actually be distributed to the larger common mass, because there shouldn't be concentration of wealth. There should instead be, because it mostly so happens that जो भी people are working at the base level, and then there are people who are working at the top level, and it mostly happens that whatever money comes in to that organization, it's mostly hoarded by people at the top level, and people at the ground level get very little of it. So it shouldn't happen like that. There shouldn't be concentration of wealth in the hands of a few powerful people. There should be distribution of that wealth and that money in the hands of the common people. That is what, these are the things that the planning commission is enforced to oversee. This is why there was a need for a planning commission, because ये जो problems है, these are very realistic problems, and these problems actually need a very realistic solution. So that is why there was, the need for setting up a planning commission, which actually there should be somebody or something that actually thinks about these problems, and in an economy, in a democratic, mixed economy that we follow. So these problems will persist, and somebody had to see to those problems, and somebody had to keep those in check. So that is why there was the need for setting up a planning commission.